right. Appreciate it very much. I hope that everybody's had a wonderful time, a Saturday after you had the service today. I hope that today's message was a blessing for you and that it's a challenge for you as well. Is there any questions before we begin based on today's message or anything you want to share from that?
I was really impressed by what you said earlier, because it is so important that, because you're right, we are the church. Each individual is the church. And I think that was a great reminder for all of us. And I want to say thank you.
Praise God. Praise God. All right. Anybody else have anything that they'd like to add or any questions that they have? All right. Then we are going to continue. If you wouldn't mind, if you're not speaking, to put your phones or your computers on mute. That'll save us from getting the background noise as we're doing the teaching today, and I appreciate it very much. It's been, I was blessed to be with you all today, and I'm hoping that today will be, this afternoon will be also a rich blessing for us all. We're going to be talking about building healthy churches, and how do we actually make a church that's healthy. Now, again, we talked about this idea of following God's path of multiplication. And one of the things that we talked about is planting new churches in the future. But we can use a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about in our current church as well. You can use much of this information can be used and integrated into your church. But sometimes it's difficult to do that in an existing church because you set rhythms, you have customs that you've developed and such. So just know that it's a little more difficult to do it in an existing church than putting it in place in a new church. I am a church planter. I've been doing church planting my entire ministry for 23 years. So this is kind of my area that I love to work in, and I'm thrilled to be part of it. We have an opportunity to start building something in North America that we haven't seen since our church began, since there was this great awakening of what God had wanted to do for us. And we're starting to see that now. It wasn't but maybe 10 years ago or less, we were actually losing more churches than we were gaining. We had a kind of a desert time of church planting. And there was just a few people out there planting regularly. And it was very discouraging. I'll tell you, I was personally discouraged. But we did find our way back. Some new leaders came about. God led them to the same kind of ideas that we talked about in today's message. And now we're seeing a great revival in multiplying churches. We've had about 1,000 new churches in the last 5 years started, which is amazing when you think we were actually losing churches before that. So we want to see that continue to expand. Our next 5-year plan for North America is even more aggressive. One of the plans that we have for North America is we're going to start 1,000 churches just like yours, like Light Bearer Mission. We want to have churches that are ran by lay people, that pastors can be there to help train and coach, but the leaders are the lay people, and the head of the church is Jesus Christ. And so this is not just, some people are asking me, how are we going to spread this message? This message is being spread around the NAD slowly but surely. There's a group of about 10 of us that have been working together for several years to try and get this started. We started in Brazil, and then we've expanded it into North America now, and it's getting a lot of traction, and we're very, very excited. We also have somebody online, I believe if she's with us today, that wanted to share a short story about how the church looks like in her country. and I wanted to make sure that she got a second to share with you all what she saw and how today's message relates to what she saw in her home country. So, Sister Indal, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but can you share with us?
Yes, thank you, Pastor. I'm Sister Lydiane Ndale. My testimony is from my church in Cameroon. I am the product of door-to-door evangelism in my area. And I came to Seventh-day Adventist faith because of this evangelism. One Seventh-day Adventist elder decided to do door-to-door evangelism in his community with another member. They were meeting in his house, praying and making plans to reach the community. It happened that they came to my house and offered to give Bible study if only we were willing, what my family and I accepted. At the end, I was convinced of the truth, studied in the Bible, and got baptized. Later on, my first son who followed also these studies, asked for baptism. When I came in the church, we quickly organized a small group in our area with 5 families. That was 5 ladies and 1 elder who were belonging to a Seventh-day Adventist church that was not near our community. So later on, we asked to be a recognized, organized small group, meeting on Wednesday and Fridays at first time, and later on Sabbath. So the church took a vote, and from that group came up another church in a nearby community. In my native town where I have been transferred, where I went later on because I was transferred there, the Seventh-day Adventist Church was organized in the small groups functioning in 2 methods, through the Sabbath school classes, especially adult Sabbath school classes, and through the neighborhood. It is this second method that was more efficient because it is relying on families. The family which had at least 2 adults were familiarized with his neighbors, and when come the harvest evangelism, we will go to those our neighbors with whom we are already familiar. And I had 1 group in my house there, and the result were 3 baptisms, and the church was able to pay the tuition of 1 young girl coming from a poor family because the mother has special needs, and even they plan to buy a wheelchair for that lady who was with special need. Each small group was giving the reports to the church through the personal ministry, and the church will pray and reach those needs if they were needs spiritually and or materially. And this church even went on, saw a land where there was no Seventh-day Adventist church, pray, and even ask for help through the general conference. And later on, they received this help and they built the church there. And today, we have 1 high school there, and we have the church there. So that's the testimony I wanted to share, to say that I know I'm a product of this door-to-door evangelism, and it works, it's efficient, and if only we can learn from it and apply it, I'm saying God will bless it. Thank you.
Amen. Amen. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. Yeah, and there's a lot of ways to multiply God's work. There is, I hear a lot of people, I've had pastors and church members tell me there's only one way to do that. But if you look at the Bible, it happened many different ways. There was churches that were planted in homes. They were planted in catacombs. There was groups that met outside. There are groups that met in the temple. I mean, the list goes on and on. So what we want to do is find out what works best in each locality, use the tools that you know, and let God lead. So we want to see more and more multiplication stories like your sister. Thank you so much for appreciate you sharing that. So what I'm going to be sharing with you today is actually how I go about building a healthy church. Now I'm showing you it as an example of what we've done, so you can see some principles. but I also want you to see it so that you can have an understanding or with this understanding as you see it, that I am not trying to tell you this is the only way to plant churches. I'm just sharing with you how it works in North America, and we've had a lot of success with it. So the process that I use, I actually call it 10 steps for starting healthy new churches. And this 10 steps that we use is not something that that we just guessed at. It's based on, these 23 years of, I'll be honest, it's 23 years of messing up. You try something in a church and you hit a wall, or you make a mistake, or something, negative happens in the process. And fortunately for me, I hate making mistakes. I know that we all do, but so when I make a mistake, I analyze it. What happened here when we started this church that we could have done differently, or what can we do differently now to make this work better? And so that's where these 10 steps came from, is developing methods to avoid the mistakes that a lot of church plants make, and then creating a system that we could use to integrate proven methods, not just from our church, but other churches, in a way that makes healthy churches. So let me give you just a little bit of background before we get into the training. I've been doing this myself, this system, for about 16 years of my planting years. And when we came first time to Maryland, I was in the Chesapeake conference, and I met somebody at the general conference. I was actually trying to get him to join my church plant, who was kind of doing worldwide church planting. And when I explained to him the method that I developed, he was much wiser than I was, and he said, you need to not just do it, but you need to show it. You need to start training. And so fortunately for me, meeting him helped me begin to share this around the world. And we've had a lot of success with churches around the world using this process, from, like I mentioned, Brazil. We've had countries in Eastern Europe. We talked about this in Australia. A lot of countries have gone through this and seen this training more than I even know, because we've done it in group trainings as well for multinational trainings. So, but I'll mention some of the stories of different groups also that have tried this. But again, take what works best for you. Don't think that this is a prescription that you have to follow word for word. Each principle is important. I wouldn't avoid the principles, but you don't have to apply the principles the exact same way that I did. And so I just want to repeat a couple of things. One is, why are we planting? We talked about it this morning. We plant because this is what God called us to do. It's His calling. It's His will. We plant because we are called people to do this multiplication. We plant because, sorry, let me get a drink of water here. I'm getting really thirsty. But we plant because this is the most effective method of evangelism. Now, this is not just Adventism that knows this. This is something that's been studied by a lot of denominations, that church planting is not the only method of evangelism, but it is the most effective method of reaching people. And then we plant because it's also the most effective way of building new leaders and disciples. So there's a lot of reasons why we plant, but most of all, it's God's design, it's His plan, and it's our calling. This presentation, in fact, this morning presentation also, if you want to jot this down or take a picture of it with your phone or whatever you want, you can get online at cpexchange.net. That stands for Church Planters Exchange.net, cpexchange.net. The General Conference built this website so that church planters like myself can put our information on there so other churches can access at any time. I put everything I have on there. This presentation, the sermon is on there. I put all of the notes. There's handouts that go with this presentation. You can use them. that they'll go into more detail than we have time to go into in this as well. All of that is right there for you. You just have to put your email address in. It's all free. We just have the email address because we don't want people filling it up with spam and stuff like that. So again, if you're listening on the phone, it's www.cpexchange.net. All right, so let's get started talking more about these 10 steps. And I'm going to give you a little timeline of how I plant churches and what it looks like, so you know how these steps come in order. And so the first 4 steps I use I call them my foundation steps. These are the ones that we're designing the church in a healthy way through the DNA building of this church. That takes me usually 1 to 1.5 months. If it's the first time using these steps, it'll take you about twice that long. But once you get used to it, it becomes much quicker. The next section is building a team. That takes me usually 2 to 4 months. And we'll talk about all these steps of kin. Then the next section, steps 6 to 8, that's training the team, building ministries and such. That takes me 5 to 7 months. And then we launch, step 9, we actually have our first service for the public. And then step 10 is actually a multiplication step. So I do a reaping series after I launch our small groups, and then plan to start our next church. So fortunately, this is being recorded, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. You can look back at this on the recording if you'd like and get all that information. But let's go right now to step 1, understanding a new community. Now, understanding a new community is, I don't understand exactly why this isn't done in more church plants. It should be done in every single church plant. We have a great opportunity to build something special in our in our churches. But if we don't understand how this process works, if we don't understand that we are called to plant for a community and not for ourselves, then we're just replacing we're just making a copy of us. And that's not what God called us to do. He called us to reach people who don't know him. So I'm going to be brutally honest, like I was in the message today. I am not trying to train you how to plant churches for Adventists. That's not what I want you to do. We have churches for Adventists. I'm trying to teach you how to plant a church for people who do not know Jesus, who don't understand the great message that God has given us, who are far from Christ, whatever it is. We want you to plant churches that reach people for Christ so that we can build the kingdom. And so, of course, they're going to learn our message. I'm not talking about avoiding our message. We need that to be front and center, because the message is our Bible. That's what we teach. But we need to make sure that we're not planting just for ourselves. And so what we do is we go into a community when I'm planting, and I basically I try to get like a college degree understanding, basically, as fast as I can of what is this community like. There's a handout on the website that I mentioned that kind of shows you different ways you can learn about this. In a 2-hour program, we can't go through this in great detail. Typically, I share what we're doing this training. I have it in different lengths of segments. Today, we're doing a 2-hour training, but this training goes as long as 4 days long. So there's a lot of detail involved in it. So I'm just giving you the outline, and we can give you, answer any questions you have in the future. And there will be time actually to ask questions throughout this program too. So if you have a question, jot it down, and make sure you have it ready, because we'll have several sections where we'll do question and answers. So I'm just going to give you my example. When I go into a community, I'm trying to figure out what type of people are there, but really I want to know what are their needs, what are the things that I can really help them. How can I be a servant to that community? And so I find several different ways to do this, but the best way is I just ask 3 simple questions. I do a survey, but not like those guys with the clipboard. Please don't be a guy or a gal with a clipboard. You know what it's like when you see somebody coming at you with a clipboard. What do you want to do, right? You want to turn around and run away. So I just memorized 3 simple questions, and it's very conversational. They don't even know that I'm doing a survey, but I just mention to them when I'm able to talk to somebody, and it can be at a park. It could be, I love laundromats because people are stuck there. They have nowhere to go. It could be at a grocery store. If it works in your community, I do door to door. Wherever you can find people, I do this. But I just ask these 3 questions. The first question I say is, I just mentioned, hey, I'm starting a new ministry here in our community that's here to serve the needs of the people. But I want to make sure that we're serving the right needs. What do you think? And here's the question. What do you think are the greatest needs in your community? And then I just wait and let them answer. Now, I don't try to steer the conversation. I want to make sure that they are answering honestly, and I'm not saying, do you think it's this or do you think it's that? I don't want to ever say that. Let them answer, and then the next question, once they give you an idea, then I always say, do you know anybody in this community who is meeting that need? The reason I say that is, like, I planted a church in Laurel, not far from us. When I planted that church, a couple of people said, homelessness is our greatest need in Laurel. When I asked, do you know anybody that's meeting that need, I found out there's a group called LARS, and it was a cohort of churches, and they had basically wiped out homelessness in Laurel. There was only a few homeless people who were left, and that's because they wanted to be homeless. They chose to be homeless. They didn't want to be in a home. And so that wasn't obviously a greatest need. So that's why I always ask the second question. Do you know anybody who's meeting that need? Because maybe it was a great need at one time, but maybe somebody's already taking care of that. I can partner with them if I want, or we can go to another need and help serve the community that way. The third question I don't ask to everybody, but if they're engaged, then I always say, this is a question I always say is, hey, if you're interested, when we get started, would you like to partner with me to help meet these needs? And that's the only time in the conversation I'll ever even attempt to recruit somebody to be part of our team in the future. Because the first step is just learning. I just need to learn about the community. I do demographic studies. I talk to lots of people about the community, but those are the things I need to know. What are the greatest needs so that I can serve that community? So you may find out that the greatest needs in your community are, single mothers. There's a lot of single parents and they need help. Or maybe the greatest need in your community is, there's a drug abuse problem, and that's something. Or that the kids have no future, nobody helping them plan for the future. I mean, there's so many different things you could hear. And that will actually help shape your new church. Now, the sad thing is that we found that most churches don't have a clue what the community needs. They actually are just doing ministry the way they like to do ministry. So I've heard a lot of people say, hey, we're going to start a church based on, this type of evangelism we do, or we're going to do a church based on health teaching. All those things are great, but if that's like the 8th or 9th thing that they need in that community, it's not going to be near as effective. We need to plant for the people. And I use this example. Imagine if Jesus did ministry kind of the way some of our new churches do ministry. What if he, did his miracles that way? Let's say blind Bartimaeus comes up to him. And if you remember the story, blind Bartimaeus is sitting on the side of the road, and Jesus calls him forward after he had screamed for mercy. And Jesus asks, what do you want me to do for you? And Bartimaeus said, I want to see. I want my sight. What if Jesus would have said, no, wait a minute. Hey, Philip, bring me that water over here you got. Bartimaeus, you're going to love this. Hey, Philip, bring that. Hey, Bartimaeus, taste this water. Bartimaeus tastes it. Now, hang on a second. And Jesus waves his hand over it, and he says, now taste this water. And he turned it into wine, and Bartimaeus like, oh, it's wine. And Jesus says, oh, isn't that great? See you later. And he walks away. I mean, Jesus did a miracle, right? Great, he did a miracle. But he didn't do the miracle that Bartimaeus needed. Now, Jesus would never do that, of course, but many churches do. They transplant what they think a community needs, and they build a church based on what they think it needs, instead of actually worrying about what the community really needs and learning what it is. So you may have all those other things you like to do, whether it's health ministries or this kind of ministry, whatever it is. We need those things, but the focus needs to be on their needs first. What do they need? Fill those needs, and then you can do the other things that you like to do. Does that make sense, everybody? You can raise your hand or you can say yes. I want to make sure we're tracking everybody.
Yes.
All right, good.
Yes. Yes.
Amen. All right, so once you learn the needs of the community, you have a good understanding of who the people are, then we can go to step 2. Now, step 2 is, put it up here on the screen for you. I call it list your core values. Another way of saying it is just know who you're going to be. Know what kind of church you are going to be. And it's very important, this step, to understand how are you going to be a unique Adventist church. And I'm going to spend a little time explaining values because they're difficult for some people to understand. So core values, basically, they're the things that guide your behavior, both inside the church and as well as how you interact with the world. It's kind of like who you are as a church. Now, all of us are Adventist churches. That's not a core value. That's a different kind of value. But what makes you a unique church for your community? That's what would be core values. And so let me give you an example here. And I'm sure you can answer this. It's not difficult. But what is the one thing Walmart is known for? You can unmute and just tell me, what's the one thing Walmart is known for?
Lower prices.
There you go. I mean, everybody knows that's what Walmart is known for. That's who they are. You know what Walmart's core value is? Low prices. That's who they are. They know what they want to do. They do everything they can to make sure that they have the lowest prices. So you understand core values already without having to do any more teaching. It's just who you are. What do you hold? What do you value at the core of your church? Now, one of the things that you have to know that core values, why they're so important, is that they actually act kind of like a riverbed. You know, if you have water rushing out in a plain, it'll just spread out everywhere. It'll go everywhere. But when you know your core values as a new church, it helps narrow your focus towards what the people really need, how you can really serve them. You understand exactly what you're there for. And thus, it makes a big flooded plain that is not moving at all into a rushing river of action. And your actions then move towards the visions and the goals that God has put in your heart for that community, because the values don't let you go beyond those borders. It keeps you focused. I don't know how many times we have had churches that everybody in the world seems to have their own value, and everybody seems to be doing their own thing. This person's doing this ministry, that person's doing this ministry. I mean, we have different ministries, but they seem to be all over the place. And we're battling one another to try and get people excited about our ministry. But that's not how church is supposed to operate. We're supposed to be one body moving in one direction with Jesus as the head. And so knowing your values for that community, understanding what kind of church you are going to be for that community, helps design all of the ministries in the future so that we're all going in the same direction. We have a goal in mind, and we're going to make it happen. So, you know, this is another example I use. values are like the hose. You know, you've got this water spigot on the outside of your house. If you turn that spigot on with no hose and you want to water your garden, where does the water go? It just goes, what, straight down on the ground, right? You got a lot of water rushing, a lot of action happening, but you got nothing happening. It's not watering the garden. Now, maybe you say, you know, I know the garden needs to be watered, so you put your hands underneath it and you run over and try and splash a little bit on your garden. You run back. I mean, that's what a lot of our ministries are like. It's like one person shows trying to get the actions of God's people to the harvest. And it's very ineffective. It doesn't have a lot of impact. You know, you can't carry much in your hand. But maybe now there's a group of people who say, you know what, we could do something better. And they grab a bucket, you know, and then we're having a lot more effect, but still a lot of the energy. You know, they fill up that bucket and they run over to the garden. They start watering it around. But while they're doing that, all that other energy is just being wasted, pouring down onto the foundation. But those who know their core values are like churches that have a hose hooked to that outside spigot. That hose is just like your core values, so that you can control where all those efforts are going, so that they're going right where they should be going. That's why it's important to know the values of your church. Now, I'm going to share with you another slide here, and this explains the different kinds of values there are. Now, this is a little more complex, so you may have to watch this again. That's okay, or you might get it right away. But there are actually 5 different kinds of values. And the reason I share this is so that you don't get confused and say this kind of value is actually a core value when it's not. So a gateway value, these are values that you have to have just to be an Adventist church. So every Adventist church would have these same values. They're not core. They're not what makes us unique in our community. They are just the values that all Adventists have. So let's say you wanted to start a church that says the Sabbath is Wednesday and has pork barbecue after the service. Well, you're not going to be allowed to be an Adventist church, right? So every one of us has our fundamental beliefs or our gateway values, those things that we all share in common. Core values, again, these are the things that make you unique as a church. These are the things that make you unique for that community. The next thing is target values. Target values are the things that you wish you could be, but you're not. Now, this is very common that churches say this is our core value when it's not what they are. One of Walmart's core values is great customer service. Now, you and I know that that's not very common at Walmart. They have, 45 checkout stands and 2 people running a stand, and you're waiting in long lines. It's hard to find somebody. One of the reasons that they can have low prices, though, is that they don't spend a lot of money on staff. They don't have a lot of checkers. They don't even spend a lot of money on training their staff. They have good people that work there. They just don't have enough so that they can save us money. So that for Walmart, even though they said their core value is good customer service, it's really what they wish they had. It's not what they actually have. In churches, we see this a lot. They may say stuff like, we are the friendliest church in the world. Oh, how in the world is that possible to even know if that's true? And honestly, the churches who say that, I often wonder if they have any grasp of reality. But we want to be a friendly church, of course, but that can't be a core value. When you can't measure it, you don't know if you're that. You can't figure it out if you're the friendliest church in the world. But there are some also things, unintended values. And this is we'll go back to our Walmart thing. This goes right with what we said before. When Walmart's core value is low prices, an unintended value is usually a negative aspect of your core value. So they had a core value that they said low prices. They wish they had a target value of great customer service, But really, because of their core value of low prices, their unintended value is typically they have poor customer service compared to a lot of other stores. And so that's something that's just a natural reaction because of their core value. Churches have the same thing. You've got to be careful with churches. You may say, you know, I heard a lot of churches say we are completely Bible-based, which praise God, that's great. But what we don't know is that the way that they're doing their value, the way that they live out their value, maybe they're a very legalistic church, or maybe they beat people up with the Bible. Who knows? So you got to be very careful when you make your core values to measure what do you think would be some negative unintended things that would happen. And then finally, deception values. That's not really something you have to worry about as a church. That's more in politics. That's basically where they say one thing, it means one thing, and it's actually just the opposite. So like they'll have a bill saying the Wilderness Protection Act. And when you read the bill, it's we're going to drill oil wells and basically sell all this land for copper mines and coal mines. But they'll call it exactly the opposite. That's what a deception value is. But churches don't do that very often, so you don't have to worry about that. All right, so now we've gone through the first two steps. Step one was understanding a community, new community. Step two is start listing your core values. So who has some questions for me right now?
I have a question. This is Sister Claretta. I'm curious about, because I like the distinction you made between core value and target value. So you have all these things that you'd like to be, but that's not really who you are. So how do you find out who you really are? Because a lot of us think that we are our target values. So how do we find out what our core values really are? And then hopefully there's enough good in our core values that somehow that translates into we can now use this to be in ministry and service to the community in the ways that they need.
Right. That's a great question. And again, I'm training on planting a new church, but you can use this in an existing church. But this takes more time if you're an existing church, because I've done this in many organizations where we have gone through and determined what is our true core values, what are we really doing, and what is aspirational. And what it takes is a lot of honest conversations. And we usually use a ton of sticky notes, and we just write down everything everybody thinks of about the church, what we think the church is, what the church should be, what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong. And then we start having discussions on where do those go in those 4 areas, maybe 5 if there's a deception value. But where do we put those sticky notes? And when we start getting some sticky notes in the core values, then we start getting very honest. Is this really who we are, or is this just who we hope to be? Now, it's okay to have good target values. Another name for these, Patrick Lencioni calls them aspirational values. He's got a great book on doing this as a team. And it's okay to have those, and there's nothing wrong with it. But if you have them, you should have a plan to make them reality eventually. Mm-hmm. So know that it's a target value. Know that that's where you want to go in the future, but you need to have a plan to actually make that who you are. I'll tell you though, I'll be honest, it's very difficult with existing churches. It's about, I would say, 40 times easier to do with a church plant, because you're actually designing everything from the beginning, and you're not battling culture. And I will tell you this, culture trumps everything. Culture trumps plans. Culture trumps best intentions. Culture is a thing that is the most difficult thing to change in an organization. So you have to recognize what is your culture, and there'll be people who will fight for culture like it's a holy thing, because that's what they're used to. So that's why things like, COVID-19, you know, our culture of being outside with people. It's shocking to all of a sudden be on Zoom instead of in person. It's shocking. But we are forced to have a culture change. And we found a lot of positives now. I hope that you did, because we've found a ton of positive things came out of being forced out of buildings, because the church is not a building. The church are the people. And we've found ways to do online training that we never thought of. I mean, just this week, I helped Puerto Rico develop a plan for multiplication for their union there. I helped Northern California. And I couldn't have done that before, because every other time, everybody thought I had to fly there. And I had to, you know, I had a plan to fly to Northern California this week anyway, but that's canceled. But the Zoom meetings are great. Now I can work with people all over the world much more quickly. And so we found a lot of positives being forced out of our culture, but it's hard to get this radical by choice. We were forced into this. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good.
I have a question.
Please, yes.
Mission statement. What category would that fall, value would that fall in, if at all?
Wow, great questions here. And when I do my longer presentation, I talk about this. I don't use mission statements. And my background is business. I ran many restaurants and had a financial services background. But we, in the business world, we knew that mission statements were useless because values are where everything's at. If you don't understand what your values are, you can make a mission statement, though, out of your values. So if you understand your values, let me give you an example. I had a church plant that I launched that was for young adults, both Adventists who were leaving and young adults who'd never heard about Jesus. I did a lot of studying with them and finding out what are their needs, what are they thinking, who are they. And we found that one of the biggest things that was a turnoff for them is that churches were very judgmental. They wanted you to dress like them, act like them from the day you walked in the door. They wanted you to be just like them, even though these Christians maybe have been doing this for many years. They think that others could just come in and be just like them day one. So one of our first value for them was that we are going to be accepting. We're going to accept people right where they are. We don't want them to stay where they are, but we're going to accept them for who they are. Another thing they told us is that they found church really boring, that they found that church, it put them to sleep, and they just didn't see why people would want to come, which was really sad to me, because I think the Bible is one of the most exciting things there is. And so that was our next core value. We're going to make sure that the Bible is presented in an exciting way, not amusement, but excitement, the excitement of being part of God's family. And so that was our next core value, having God presented in a way that's exciting and compelling to people. And then finally, they at those days, it was not the number one thing, but today it's the number one reason why young people don't go to church, is they said that there was too many hypocrites. They would hear people say this about Jesus and that about the Bible, but they live just the opposite. And so our third core value was being real. We were going to be honest and transparent. If we were dealing with a sin in our life, we were not going to hide it. If we were having struggles, we were going to be honest. We were going to let people be real. We're not going to put on the Sabbath smile in the morning. We're not going to be battling with our family in the car all the way to church, and then as soon as we step out of the car, we act like everything's perfect. We were going to be real human beings with them. And so what we did is we had that everywhere our church's name was, underneath it said accepting, exciting, real. And that became both our core values and our mission statement. And so you can use it that way, but just keep it short. If you have a mission statement, it should be really simple. Most churches that I go to the pastors have to look up the mission statement. Even they don't know what it is. So just make sure that it's something that connects also with the community. It's not just something you want to use for yourself. And again, a lot of mission statements are based on other things than core values as well. And they should be based on core values only. Good questions. Any other questions?
Brother Steve, I wanted to ask you about something that you shared earlier in your sermon. You know, you were making reference to the fact that we may not have moved away from the church's message, but we have in terms of the method. Mm-hmm. And in regards to the method, you shared a statement or two from Ellen White about pastors hovering over churches and they should be out and about doing evangelism. We are, as a church, we've adopted that model, but we are the exception as opposed to the norm. And for someone like yourself, who is a conference official, and as I look at the conference, I'm not seeing this model that mirrors what we're doing here. So by virtue of your sharing and being a conference official, the only fair conclusion that I can draw is that the conference has now decided to move in a different direction.
Yes, we are. It's going to take and that's a great question. Thank you for bringing that up. Just like a church, it's very difficult to change culture. This conference, it wants to change culture, but it's a culture that's been going on for decades and decades and decades. This isn't just a culture of our conference. It's a culture of North America. And it's not just our conference that's making this switch. There are many conferences that are starting to move this direction. But it takes much longer for a conference. And some of the reasons is because churches are so used to this culture that if you force it upon all the churches quickly, they just freak out. It's not a healthy change. Healthy change has to be done in a way where you're not forcing people to make radical moves beyond their capability of handling them. So what we're doing is, our plan is this, and I'll just give you a quick rundown. We plan to plant more churches in the future, in the next 13 years, than we have churches that exist today. That is a radical plan. We plan to plant over 300 new churches, and we want to reach the entire, every neighborhood we can, every community we can in our conference. As these new churches are planted and they start looking like your church, like Light Bearers, when they start seeing that how that model works so well, then the culture will shift. And there's a study done that we follow that I've used for many years in business before I became a pastor, that you have to have an 18% of people on board before you start introducing the culture shift. I'm telling you this because you're already there. I don't have to couch it in any other terms. You're there. You understand what it means to be a lay-driven church, where lay people are doing the work that they're supposed to be doing. But when you have a church that's so reliant on pastors doing the ministry, it takes a long time for them to wake up. And so movements are actually done in not in secret, but in silence. Movements happen when you start making changes, not from a pulpit and screaming at people about it, but by actions. And so our actions are, we're developing a lot of churches like yours, where the lay people are trained to be effective leaders and doing the things they can, and pastors are being released one after another. So I have right now 9 pastors that I am working with heavily. We have another 6 that are in a very intensive training program. And that's kind of our first steps. But I'm new here. And so this is a new thing for the conference. They started realizing this about 2 years ago, and I've only been here a year. So they were looking for someone like me that could help implement this plan. So it'll take, we believe it'll take probably another, honestly, 3 to 5 years before this is the normal conversation.
Okay, just a quick follow-up question, and I'll let someone else jump in with the question. That is, Pastor, what kind of reaction, if any, have you in the conference seen from the quote-unquote old school pastors, the one who's been around for a while and are accustomed to, for lack of a better phrase, hovering over churches? Because this represents a radical change for them. Are they? I would imagine they've already heard of this and they know it's coming. I was wondering what kind of reaction are you guys getting from those folks?
Wow, you're asking some solid questions. Good stuff. Actually, we have had only one pastor give us any negative feedback out of all the pastors. That doesn't mean that there aren't others who secretly have negative thoughts about it. But when I've been presenting this at pastors' meetings, at town halls, the conference president, Bill Miller, the personal ministries or pastoral ministries leader, Rick Jordan, they have been saying right up front, this is where we're going. This is where we're going. And so I'm not just speaking this myself, but other leaders in the conference are agreeing this is our plan. We've had this plan both ratified in AdCom and an executive committee as well. So this is something that we know is coming, but we're not going to try and, I guess the best way to say is we're not trying to shove it down churches' throats. We want them to see healthy examples. And when they see healthy examples, then people will be excited about, or at least most churches will be excited about making some changes in that direction.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. All right. Well, for sake of time, let's continue. I want to go on to step number 3. Remember, step number 1, understand your community. Step number 2, design your core values. What kind of church are you going to be? Now, step number 3. Oh my goodness, my brothers and sisters. Oh, if you don't listen to any other step except for this one step, then this is the one right here. You have to know your goals for your members. And what does this mean? This is a discipleship pathway. You have to know how you're going to help your members grow. So this is something I have not seen any church do. Let me just ask this question. You can type it out there. Give me the exact number, not members. I don't want to know your membership, but I want to know the exact number. You can put it on the screen. How many disciples do you have exactly in your church right now? Go ahead and type those out there. Right. That's this kind of response I get always. People don't know because we haven't been tracking if we're being successful at making disciples. I've asked this question around the world, and I've maybe gotten 2 answers. And literally, I mean, I've talked to crowds of 10,000 and not a single person can answer this. This has become not an epidemic just in Adventism, but an epidemic in Christianity. Jesus said, go make what? Disciples. We're supposed to make disciples. And yet, we don't even know what it looks like. The reason we don't track discipleship is because yes, please.
Yeah, we are tracking our Bible studies and so forth in CCB. Is that what you're talking about?
No. Beyond that. But thank you for saying that. A Bible study is a great step, and that is a path towards learning about Jesus. But what is a disciple? And that's a thing that is more than just a believer. It's more than just a follower. That's what a lot of people think. Well, I'm a disciple because I said yes to Jesus. You're a disciple in the making, yes. But I'm talking about, are we done making strong disciples? How are we going about making people who are effective in ministry? And one of the trademarks of a strong disciple, and I know you have disciples in your church. I know you have them. But it's not something we talk about. Like, how are we developing every single member to become a strong disciple. And so what we need to do as churches is we need to open the Bible, and we need to start looking at, what did Jesus teach men? You know, there were fishermen, and there was women that joined his group as well. What did he teach people? What did he want them to become? And what was the results? Because we see that what a disciple of Jesus looks like is somebody who is a leader, who's doing massive things for Christ. They're making an impact in the world. Now, it looks different for everybody. You know, there are people who are, have different personalities. Not every disciple is going to be doing the same thing. But we have to actually have a plan of how to grow our people. So when they come and we teach them Bible studies, praise God, that is an important step. And that's part of the process. When he said, go make disciples of all nations, baptizing them, teaching them, those are things that we're supposed to be doing. So there's 3 actions that lead to the results that he said. Go, that's first thing. So that means wherever we're going, we're supposed to have this in mind. We're supposed to be teaching or baptizing people so they have to know about Jesus, accept him, and we're supposed to be teaching them to understand everything that he's taught us. And so we're supposed to be doing those actions so that we can make disciples. So what we do with our church plants, and when I do coaching for church planting, and with other churches as well, is we spend some time going through the Bible, figuring out exactly what a disciple looks like. And I've got an example on that website that I gave you earlier, that kind of what we use as our churches after we did that kind of study. But I like every church to do their own study, because you might see things a little bit different than I do, and that's okay. We have a Chinese church planter in the Rockville area right now. And since COVID's hit, he's been kind of stuck at home. He has a brand new baby, so he's got to be very careful. But we've been just working on this one step for the last several months. And he's got about 17 pages of notes of different ways that people have been trained in the Bible, and different ways of how disciples interact in the world. I mean, it's the most extensive research I have seen. Very good stuff. But it's great. Now he's going to start developing a plan. He's got in his plan 5 different steps to help develop disciples. My plan is I look for 3 things, and I'll just share with you my plan, but I want you to do your own. But just to give you an example, I found that there's 3 common elements that every single disciple has. One is that they all are mission-minded. They want to go do the mission of Christ. They want to share the good news, and they don't think church is there for them. They put those who are lost first. Jesus said he left the 99 behind to go find the one lost sheep. And that's the way Jesus would have designed the church, and the way we should too. So they're mission-minded. They also embrace community. They know that we are supposed to love each other. Church is not a battleground. It is a place where our love for one another as brothers and sisters, the Bible says in Luke that our love is the most powerful outreach tool there is, because when they see that we love each other, the world will know. They will know that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. They will know that we were sent by Jesus. That if they see that kind of embracing community where they don't see that in the real world normally, they will be so impressed and so drawn to it that they'll want it. They'll beg for that. And so we say, praise God. That's the kind of church we should have. So they mission-minded, they embrace community. And the third thing is they want to grow. We got to get past this stagnation Adventism, stagnation Christianity, where people sit in their chairs or their pews and just get fed. No, they have to want to take it to the next level. They have to want to grow. And so what I do in my churches, and you can do whatever you want, but to track how people are doing in their discipleship, we have a discipleship pathway based on those 3 things, helping people grow in those areas. And of course, there's a lot of detail on the handouts. We don't have time to go through it all, but the handout's there for you to look at, and I can explain it to more detail if you want me to come back another time. but we develop a plan of how we're going to help a new person coming in the door grow and to be a strong disciple for Jesus Christ. And then we track that, we track their growth by a self-assessment test, where every 6 months we take a kind of a survey, 36 questions. I take it too, and we kind of track how we're growing. And we answer these questions honestly on a scale of 1 to 5. How am I doing in these 36 different areas? Some are behaviors, some are how I feel, some are how I believe, different things. And we use that then to help people grow and develop a plan for the next 6 months to get to the next level. And so that's what we use. You can use whatever you want. I have an example of that on the website as well. Everything I do, I have an example for you on that website. So that's a very important step. We want every church to have, even if they're not planting, we want them to have a plan to grow strong disciples. Strong leaders really is another way of saying it. People who are going to make an impact for Christ. Step 4, let me go to that one. And after this step, we'll have questions on those 2 steps. Step 4 is building a proposal and information sheet. This one's no fun. Nobody likes to do it. It's a lot of work, but basically what we do is we take those 3 foundational steps, understand your community, make sure you build strong core values, and then have a discipleship plan and know your goals for members. And we create a blueprint for what the church is going to look like. That's the proposal part of that. And this is a really good tool to have because it helps you stay on track when you're launching a new church. It's kind of like, again, if you're going to build a house, you have the plans and now you can follow the plans to build it. So everything up to this point was just planning. And this is now the blueprints to make that happen. And so these things actually can be used in a lot of different ways. Why do we create these things? Well, we just had a church in our conference that is going to be launching a church into DC. And this church has planted another church already, and now they're going to plant another church into DC, an area that we don't have enough churches in. And they created this excellent proposal, and we use that to train people, but we also use it to fundraise. And you'll never guess how much money this church raised. Over $700,000 to help plant this new church. I mean, I've never seen anything like it, but the proposal was like nothing I've ever seen before. It was very professional looking, very detailed. And when people who you want to fundraise or you want to recruit or just want to share the idea with, if they see something that is done well, that makes really good sense, then people get excited about that. And so this church plant is going to be, financially strong. That's not the only thing you need in a good church plant, but it's certainly helpful. So that's one of the reasons we build a proposal. Also, it gets the conference excited. That they know that you know what you're doing when you have a good proposal. It's something that they have confidence in you as a planter, as a group, whoever's doing it, that you know where you're going with it. So very, very helpful to have that right. Now, you also might have noticed that there's a thing called information sheet. And information sheet is just kind of taking the big proposal, which might be 7, 14 pages, whatever you make it, and shrinking it down to just one sheet. And we use that for recruiting. And we'll explain more in the next step how I use that information sheet. But it's basically kind of just like the bullet points of all the things we've talked about. What does the community need? What are our core values? How are we going to make disciples? What is our leadership structure? Where are we going to meet? Those basic things about a church plant. So that when we're meeting people that we would like to have them on our core team to grow a church, then we have that right in front of them. They can kind of follow an outline as we're having a discussion. All right. So any questions? Anybody have any questions at all?
Pastor Leddy, this is Marlene.
Please. Hi, Marlene.
Hi. So I really like the 3 points that you mentioned about discipleship, what we should have as disciples. We, especially now, because we have several people we're doing Bible studies with who are very close, you know, they've accepted the Sabbath, and we're praying on everything regarding them. But just the thought of having new members, I don't know if you're familiar with the discipleship handbook that comes from the Michigan conference.
Yes.
So our plan, personal ministries have plans to use that for our new members. We have the mentors guide as well, and that would cover discipleship in general. I'm looking at the table of contents, and helping them with a devotional life as well as personal ministries, church life, Christian lifestyle, and cycle of evangelism. So in terms of discipleship, that's our proposed plan. But again, I really like what you described here. So this is something that we'd probably look into as well. So I don't know how familiar you are with the book, the handbook. But
Yeah, I'm familiar. There's actually several different books and methods. And I have no problem with you using that. Here's the thing that I've found, and so you have to be aware of it. And luckily, when you hear me say this, it'll help you not fall into this trap. But a lot of churches that use somebody else's method never end up following through. They're spending all the time trying to determine what did they mean or how does this work, or they just get bored of it because it's not their own. The churches that make their own discipleship pathway and determine how they're going to make disciples, because you might do like one-on-one mentoring, you might teach classes, because everybody teaches differently. Like for me, I love to mentor a small team and then train that team to mentor other small teams. Other people are excellent at larger group trainings. Other people can only do one person at a time. It doesn't matter. But if you have a system that is one size fits all, it'll help some churches, and maybe it's perfect for yours. The Michigan plan might be exactly what you need, or it might not. I don't know. So just be aware that it's easier to turn away from somebody else's plan than your own. And so that's why I always make every one of my church plants, when they're all my planters, they have to design their own curriculum for making disciples. If they want to use something that they found here or there, that's perfectly fine. So I'm not saying no, it's not a good thing. Just make sure that it's really going to be you. It's your church, and it's not just a few people that like it, but it's your whole church is bought in. This is a system we're going to use because it is a very comprehensive system. There's a few shortfalls you might, as you study the Bible and learn what a disciple is more and more, you'll see there's a couple things that they miss in there and that you'd want to add. Or maybe there's a couple of things in there that you don't think are as important. You don't need to put those in there. So just look through it, make sure it's the perfect fit for you. Does that make sense?
Yep, it certainly does. Thank you.
Okay.
This is Sister Rodriguez. A question. Obviously, you know, when new members come in, I'm more concerned for those of us who are already in the church, because we really need that type of a training.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming more so than any, because we already have preconceived disciplines and so forth and cultures.
Right.
What is your and it sounds like that's what you're saying, that all need to, whether they're new, but mainly for the foundation, the body of the church, those members need to really get that type of training to be successful in being discipled. So am I getting that correct? And how do you go about that?
So yes. So again, I'm giving you a kind of a church planting seminar, but if you're trying to put it into an existing church that's already going, the thing is you start with those members you have. So when I'm doing a church plant, I build a team, and part of my training process is to take them through the discipleship path before we ever have a service. I want everybody to understand what it is to be a disciple and help them grow in those areas so that when we launch, then they are already disciples ready to make new disciples. If you have an existing church and you're introducing a discipleship pathway, then you need to actually train your members in that pathway before you start training your new people in that pathway, or else it's disingenuous. You'll have new people going through things that existing people are never doing. And honestly, people can, not only is culture, we call it culture is king because it's very hard to change, but it's very easy to spot. So new people will come in and say, wait a minute, you're training me to do this, but that's not how most people here are living or what they're doing. So you have to be the disciple before you can make the disciple. That's a very important process to go through in your church. So good questions.
Thank you.
So sir, my name is Paris and Talheimer, and I was wondering, so basically what I'm hearing, our church has to be an example first, so we can learn from our own church how to do another church. Am I correct?
No, not necessarily, not to do another church. So it's actually easier to create a culture. It's actually easier to create a culture than to change a culture. So if you were going to plant a church, it's not that difficult to create a new culture.
I got you.
But you do need to be an example if you're going to do discipleship.
Amen.
You do need to be an example of a disciple. And now I'm not saying don't do Bible studies, like put everything on hold and let's all become disciples. That's not what I'm saying at all.
No.
Continue doing Bible studies, but just make sure that those people who are members of your church are starting to go through this discipleship pathway as well. So the new people and the existing people are all going through a process. And listen, you can't do the things that I can do in a church plant in an existing church. You just can't. But I can do stuff that is radical to an existing church that they could almost never do. Like, and this might sound legalistic, and I don't want it to sound that way because it's not. But we make sure that our culture is very protected, and because we want to be a biblical church, we want to follow the examples of Jesus. And so,
exactly.
if you come into our church and say, I don't want to grow as a disciple, we will love you. We will explain it to you. We will go through the Bible text with you. But if it's something that you just don't want to be part of, then we will help you find a church where that's okay, because it's not okay in my church. The church that God has called us to build that's not the kind of church we're going to be, because it's not just because we're trying to be hard, but because when new people come in and see that person who refuses to grow, refuses to embrace community, refuses to be part of a discipleship track, whatever it is, and they're not doing ministry or whatever it is, then they think that that's okay too. If it's okay for you, it's okay for me. And people pick up on that. And we talk all the time to new people we're doing Bible studies with. This is what it looks like. But then they come to church and they say, wait a minute, 60% or 80% of the people are doing nothing. That's really okay too. And so we get a lot of people we do a disservice for. We share what Jesus says, but we don't show them how to live it because that's not the example in our church. So we're not doing that for salvation issues. We're doing that for obedience issues. We want to show people what it's like to thrive in Christianity, not just be a consumer of Christianity. And so in a church plant, you're welcome. So, but again, it's, you can cause a lot of fights in an existing church. It's very difficult. It takes a lot of time to adjust culture. So don't force it down people's throats, just like we're doing in the conference. We're not trying to force things. We're trying to build examples of success so that others will follow. That's maybe what I would do in your existing church. If you're going to do a discipleship pathway, Get those who are interested right from the beginning, help them grow, let them be an example to others in a positive way, not in an arrogant way, but in a loving servanthood way. And let others see that, and so that they'll want to be part of that too. All right?
Quick question, Pastor.
Please, yes.
In our area, it's pretty densely populated as far as the religious population is concerned. And I was just wondering, and the steps that you outlined of trying to just have these conversation with people and ask them the greatest need. How do you find that work in an area that is really a densely, where so many people are already affiliated with some church?
It doesn't, I'm not trying to get them to become Adventists, so it doesn't matter. You know, and again, it's harder at first. I've done this for so many years. It's very second nature for me, but I just start a conversation. You know, if I'm at a park, I'm like, oh, what a beautiful day. Yeah. And I just say, you know, maybe I'll say, you know, I'm new to this neighborhood. Is this an area you walk in? Is there other good trails? I'll just randomly talk to people, you know, whatever happens to be the conversation. Then that's when I say, you know, I'm actually here to help this neighborhood. I want to meet the needs. We're starting a new ministry designed just to help this neighborhood. And that's when I get into those questions. So it doesn't matter if they're church or not. I think it might even be easier if they're church, because when I say ministry, it's not going to freak them out. So I don't think it would make any difference one way or the other. All right, so we need to keep going because, wow, time is flying and we're only on step 5. So we need to get going. So the next step, but you guys have had excellent questions. The next step is now we're actually building a team. How do you build a team in a church plant? And we do this very purposefully. So when I'm building a core team, and a core team is basically, they mostly are going to be the leaders of the new church. I don't just say, hey, who wants to go build a church? Who wants to be part of it? Because there's a lot of things that can happen if you just let anybody go. Accepting every person who's interested can attract some people you don't want in your church plant. It can damage the DNA of a new church. Because some people who want to control new churches, you know, they have that. I know you've all seen them. There's people in churches that just want to control everything. And sometimes they're attracted to a new church. Maybe they've tried to control another church and they haven't been successful. And they see a new church is going to come along, and boy, that's very attractive. I want to be in charge. And again, that's more of the disciples thing. We want position, we want power, we want prestige, instead of we want to be a servant. So you got to be careful that just attracting anybody can attract these people. Also, there's people who have issues with the Adventist church, whether it's structure or beliefs, or they think, you know, they have strange teachings, whatever it is. They're often attracted to new churches too, because they think they can get their voice heard better in those churches. There are people who want to push personal agendas, but the most part, there's really good people, awesome people, Adventists and not Adventists. They just have different values. If you're planting in this community, and this is something that you know you're really trying to build for this community, there are some people who are great people, but they just don't get it. They don't understand that you're planting, you know, they're planting for this group of people, and it makes an impact on your church if you let them in as well. So these are the 3 areas I mentioned before that are my discipleship process. But when I do an interview with somebody, and let me explain that real quick. When I do an interview with somebody, it's actually sitting down and talking to them. I don't tell them I'd like to interview you. I just ask them, hey, we're starting a brand new church in this area. It's here to serve the community, and I guarantee you it's like nothing you've ever seen before. And I would just like to share with you what we're going to be doing, because you might know some people who are interested. That's usually what I say. And I sit down with them over a lemonade or a hot chocolate or a meal, whatever you want. And we just spend about an hour going through the different things. But what I'm looking for is as I'm sharing what the church looks like, and I mention something, I always ask them, so what do you think about that? What's your reaction to that? Give me some feedback to what we just talked about. I want to see how they're reacting when I say that we are a church for those who don't know Jesus yet. I want to see if they have any kind of mission minded. They don't have to be perfect, because we haven't done a good job of making disciples in churches. So I'm not looking for people who are perfect disciples. I'm just looking for people who want to be that, who understand that that's what church should be. They want to be part of a community. They want to grow. This is the things that I'm looking for. And I'm looking also for telltale signs that they just think this church is for them. One of the biggest questions I get when I'm doing this is somebody will ask, so what kind of music are you going to have? And I always say this when they ask those kind of questions: why do you ask? And I want to know what they're thinking. If they say, well, I only like this kind of music at church, even if it's exactly the kind of music that we're going to have, I'm not going to put them on my core team, because I know that they think this church is for them. They think that I'm building it to make them happy. If they're asking me questions about what are we going to do to make their kids happy, them happy, serve their needs, then they are so stuck in consumerism right now that that's not something I'm not going to have time to work with them and grow them out of that. Now, they can come to the church after it starts, but they can't be part of the core team that helps develop this church. So I'm always looking at those things. I want to make sure that I'm building a team that is focused and has alignment, that our core team shares the exact same vision. If we do that, if we know what our core values are, the vision that God has given us to serve this community, how we're going to develop disciples, if they can see that when we're doing an interview and they get excited, then I know that is probably somebody that we would want to have on our team. And so let me explain the interview process briefly. The first time I did this was about 16 years ago. And I remember the very first person I met, his name was Jesse. And Jesse was 21 years old. I was starting a young adult church in Seattle, Washington. And I didn't know anybody. I moved to Seattle with my wife, and we literally knew no one in the area that we were planting. And so how are we going to plant a church? We did not have a church helping us. We didn't want a church helping us. I'll be honest. I don't use mother churches myself. Other planters do with very great success, but I don't. So how do I build a church? Well, I found somebody at the conference in Seattle who knew a few people in my area, 7 people. And so I called up Jesse. He was one of the ones I called, and we got together and we met, and I shared with him everything we were going to do. And I just asked questions. We learned about each other. It's very conversational. It doesn't feel like an interview of any kind. We're just sharing about each other's lives, getting to know each other, learning about what the church is going to be like. And I found out that he was an artist. In fact, at that young age, very successful. He won like the Seattle Film Festival already. He's a very successful artist. And he had been an Adventist his whole life, going to a larger Adventist church. And I just said, Jesse, I mean, God has really blessed you. And he was tracking really well with everything we were talking about. And I said, man, have you ever thought about using all these gifts? You could use them to glorify God. And what if you use them to help us build this church? What do you think? And he was kind of stoic, and I couldn't read him. And then he looked me straight in the eyes and he said, you have my life. And I got goosebumps immediately. I still get them today. I've told that story, I can't remember how many hundreds of times. And it's still so amazing to me. In fact, I was so surprised. I said, what? Like, what'd you say? And he said it again. You have my life. And he wasn't joking. He gave his life to this church. He wanted what we were talking about. He was so excited that there was something like this happening because he had never been asked to use his gifts for God. He'd been going to this church and nobody ever even noticed him. He was kind of a forgotten young adult. And nobody cared what he thought or what he did. And he even quit his job, got another job so that he could give us more time, and was devoting 40 hours a week to help us build this church plant. Once it launched, he got married to a girl who had never been to church. I did Bible studies with her. They'd been dating when we had this conversation, baptized her. They were some of the most powerful disciples. They were some of the few that I took on right away and developed. They launched 2 more churches out of our church. They launched our children, or our youth ministries. They launched our prayer meeting. I mean, this guy had been doing nothing in church, nothing. In fact, he told me later I was planning on leaving Christianity, not just Adventism. I was going to leave Christianity because it was giving me nothing. And it's because he wasn't involved in it. It wasn't part of his life. He was just listening from the sidelines. Consumerism is never exciting. It's not what we're called to be part of. We got to be much bigger than that. And so how do I grow this church? Well, one of the ways I do that is by 3 questions at the end of every interview. I always ask 3 things. And I say, so let's use Jesse as an example. I did this for him too. I say, Jesse, if this is somebody I really want, Jesse, I would be really excited to have you as part of our team as we're growing this church. But God says that he builds his church. So I'm not going to ask you to join us today. I'm going to instead ask you, would you pray about this? Pray over the next week. Pray sincerely and often. And if God is directing you somewhere else, then we'll praise God with you. But if he's letting you, if he's giving you the okay to join us, then we would love to have you part of this team. And I just tell him, I'm going to call you back in a week. Is that okay? And the second thing I say is, the devil just heard our conversation and he doesn't like it. He doesn't want this church to happen. So would you please pray for us? Pray that nothing can come and sweep us away, that we are staying on God's course, doing what he calls us to do. And then the third question is actually how I build a church quickly. Now, I haven't told you that this church that I knew nobody, 10 months after we started, we had 217 people. And this is how we do it. I said, Jesse, you've heard what kind of church we're going to build. You know what we're about. And certainly you know some people who would be excited to hear about this kind of church. Why don't you pull out your phone and just go through the names in your phone. Let's see if some names just pop to your mind you think would be interested in hearing about this. Some people are like, ooh, I don't want to give you names, but then I remind them, remember, I never pressured you. I didn't even pressure you to join. I just said pray about it. I won't pressure any of your friends just like I didn't pressure you, because I'm not trying to pressure people. This isn't a sales job. This is the Holy Spirit leading this thing. We want the Spirit to lead it. And so, as you're looking through that, even have prayer, how about this person, God? How about this person, God? And so I get those names. So 7 people that I met at first, they gave me names, and those people, when I met them, they gave me names, and those people, and we ended up meeting tons and tons of people. Now listen, my brothers and sisters, I don't build a core team only of Adventists. I don't believe in it. I don't think it makes any sense, because we are called to be missionaries as church planters. And think about missionaries going to any country, any land. How many Adventists were there to help them start the work? None. They started with 0. My second church plant, I started with 0 active Adventists, had none. That's okay. You can do that. It just takes longer to train them up front. I typically have about a third of my group are active Adventists who get it and want to be part of it. Another maybe 30% are former Adventists, or people who have some connection, maybe a relative of these people, that have some connection and understanding of what Adventists are. And then about 40% are non-Adventists. I've even had, honestly, in my core team, and we've had atheists, we've had Muslims, many other peoples of many other faiths, or no faith. And that's fine because they know what we're doing. We're building a church. But when you have a vision to do something so powerful for a community, and you're doing it as a team, wanting to be a community, grow together, and be on mission together, then people get excited. They get excited and they want to be part of it. Even if they don't believe in God yet, they want to be part of it. I was shocked when that atheist said, I want to do this. You know, but it's because God is working in that conversation. We pray heavily before we do any interview. I hope that makes sense. Let's go ahead and answer some questions if you have any questions on this, because this is a really big point on developing a team.
Okay. Yeah, Brother Steve.
Yes.
I'm hearing you talk about integrating non-Adventists and in some case atheist non-believers into the church building process. That raises red flags in my mind because, you know, I think about, I mean, you made reference earlier to Constantine, and one of the, you know, negative things that came out of that was the mixture of truth and error, which led to the watering down of the Word of God, which eventually led to apostasy, and as you well know, the you know, the 1260 days of papal persecution, 538 to 1790. I mean, we know all that history. So when you say building churches and we're integrating non-believers and folks who do not understand the truths that we are blessed to have, being recipients of this great spirit of prophecy gift that God has given to the last day church, I'm very concerned. Can you respond to that?
Absolutely. I am just doing exactly what Jesus did. He didn't pick the people that were the highest positions of the religious authority. He picked average people and poured into them. So really, once you hear the next step, I think it'll make more sense to you. But I'm not letting non-believers or people that would have a different pathway, I'm not letting them set the course. That's one of the reasons why I made a very clear outline. And this is who we are. When I do the interview, they know this is exactly what we're going to do. They know we're going to be an Adventist church. They know how we're going to do church. They know how we're going to serve the community. They know how we're going to make disciples. They have to agree to all those things to be part of the core team. So they're not going to take me off course. I'm going to instead be the influencer in their life. Just like Matthew the tax collector, he wasn't ready to be a disciple in a lot of Adventist minds, but that's exactly who Jesus took. And he was still partying with his friends and all these things. But Jesus knew that he wasn't going to be the one influenced. Jesus wasn't going to be influenced. Matthew was going to be influenced. And that's why we take these people, because I know that these people will be baptized or they'll walk away. There will be no other option. They're not going to change the course of the church plant.
Yeah, I hear you, brother.
I'm sorry, can I say something?
Yes, please.
A clean sheet dirty and a dirty sheet clean. So,
but we are not Jesus. We are disciples of Jesus, which means our leader is Jesus, and therefore it's kind of like I mean, I understand your point, because what he did, he got people from all walks of life and then turned them. I'm going to use the term Seventh-day Adventists just because Adventists, true Adventists, you know, followers of Christ, true followers of Christ. However, saying this, I also wonder, when you have people coming in with bad habits, it takes teaching them first before they become disciples, you know. And so basically what I'm hearing, they're coming in, and as they come in, they stay if they follow the way it should be done, and if they don't, they just fall away. Am I hearing some of that? Because when you bring, let's say I come in, and I said that the other day, if I meet an atheist, okay, I will. I have said, and I say it now, and my church family probably going to drop their jaw when they're about to hear what I'm about to say. When I see an atheist or a Muslim or a Jew, I go with the atheist first. They say, oh, I'm an atheist. I don't. I say, wait a minute. I understand how you feel. I'm an atheist too. Now when I use the term atheist, then they're looking and say, oh, you're atheist? Oh, and we start a conversation. And then I bring in Jesus, because when atheists talking about, I'm an atheist, they're speaking about certain beliefs that they have that I don't have. Okay? Which brings me a little bit closer to them. I don't specifically say what I don't believe.
Right.
So when we speak, we can sound like two atheists, but the fact remains that they're believing in something. My belief happened to be, I believe in the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. I believe in Jesus as my Savior, and I also believe in that he's the one that leads me.
Right.
So when I meet a Muslim, I go by dress because they have Muhammad. To me, Jesus is not a prophet. He's the Son of God. However, I'm going to go because I'm a modest dresser. I don't show to everybody whatever I have, and that's an attachment. You can say, hey, you and I have something in common. I leave out the fact that I'm actually born a Jew. Then I say, we have something in common. We dress really nice because we respect the Lord, because they do it for respect.
Right.
So, and we do it too for respect. So you see, you have something with each person, but in the same time, I'm not going to start and wear the headgear because I want to be like, okay? So we are starting a dialect. If I come to you and you eat pork, I'm not going to say, you disgusting. Don't you understand? As a matter of fact, when a Muslim told me, he said, we eat kosher, and you guys eat kosher. And I did it in a restaurant, actually. I approached the young man, and I said, I know you are my brother because where we come from, being Jewish heritage and also Seventh-day Adventist. So I said to him, he says, yes, we don't eat unclean anything. I said, sir, would you be offended if I told you that the shrimp is the pig of the ocean? And he was, no, that's okay. I said, no, the shrimp is the only animal that has a cycle. Let me tell you, the man looked at me, he dropped the shrimp, he says, oh my goodness, I had no idea. Thank you for telling me last time he had a shrimp, he said.
Yeah.
Now you see, now we can talk. Now we can talk. We can bring our, but we don't confirm to other people.
Right.
See, that's the fear I have. If you don't, and many people, how solid are they in the faith that they can say, oh yeah, I can do that? I think they have to be really, really solid in the faith so they don't become, like they say, you go and all of a sudden you're out of the church.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, totally understand. Okay. One of the things that I said at the beginning is you don't have to follow the way I do it. These are principles. So you can build a team with only Adventists if that's more comfortable for you. This is just how
I can build a team with other people, but I would say this is the rule.
It is.
This is what our rules are based on. We are going by the health message, blah, 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 and all the different things. You can't you can't build a team on everybody's opinion. Exactly.
Yeah. So I've never had a problem with that. Never had a problem with it. The people that I've had join, again, what will happen is they'll see, man, they thought this sounded like a really good thing to be joined. They were excited about it at the beginning, but they see, man, this really is a church. And, we have a very set way that we do, grow as a spiritual community. And some people are just thrive in that don't know Christ, and others say that's too much for me, and they usually walk away. And that's fine. At least they've gotten the taste of it, and I'll reach out to them and try and give them Bible studies on the side after that, if they're not going to be growing. But again, when I get to the next step, we'll have more information about that. So let's get to that next one, because this is an important one, and I'm almost out of time, and I'm only on step 6, so really going to have to rush this one here. So the next step. So once I start building this team, then I start training them, and for when I do this, I do training every single week. There's somebody who's not on mute, so we're getting a little bit of feedback. So if you're not on mute, please mute. But when I start training this team, it is every week. Now, you don't have to do it that way either. This is my process. You use your own process. But this is a tool to use, is training your team. And what I do is I train them in several areas. First, I try and train them to be a disciple. And so every single week, we're going through these 6 different areas that I have on the screen. If you're on the phone, I'll list them. First, I help them understand what it is to be a disciple, how to live as a disciple. What do you do? And so we go through the discipleship process that we've already talked about, and that I've already written out. We're going through that as a team. So whether they're Adventists or not, they're now growing as a disciple of Jesus, which includes living according to the beliefs that we have in the Bible. And so all of that is covered in there. We also talk about growing together as a spiritual family. We are not going to be just spiritual individuals doing our own personal devotions and stuff. But we're also going to be a family who is growing together spiritually. So what does it look like to be a spiritual community under Christ? Very important. Another thing is I train is how to be a leader. This is a big deal. I wish I had really a lot more time, because this one I love to flesh out, but I don't have time to today. But this is really important. I train every core member not just how to lead in a church, but how to be a leader in life. How do you lead in your work? How do you lead in your neighborhood? How do you lead in your family? How do you lead at school? We want people to learn how to be leaders. This is something that will revolutionize how effective your church is and how great of an impact you can have as a leader. When I was, and I'll give you the short version of this story that I really love to share. But when I was a kid, my mom, who I think is on the line with us, actually, I invited her to come listen in. She took me to this church, and this church, they actually trained me to be a leader. My parents gave me a good work ethic. I was working when I was 12 at a burger place and mowing lawns, and so I had a good work ethic when I was young. But they let me grow as a leader as a young teenager, and that translated into the workforce. And by the time I was 24 years old, I had 1,000 employees underneath me. I ran a series of restaurants throughout Washington State, and the impact that training had when I was young led to a big impact in my life. So we train people how to lead in all areas, including the church. We train people how to impact communities. And what are we going to do as individuals and as a group to make a difference in our community? We train everybody how to run every vital ministry. Even if you're never going to be a greeter, even if you're never going to be in the worship team, even if you're never going to be whatever other vital ministries you have for that community, I want you to know how to run it. Why? Because I want you to be able to repeat this. I want you to be able to take it to the next level and maybe plant another church. Or if I leave as a pastor or whoever's leading the church plant, then you can take over and start running this plant. However it is, I need people who are ready to run things. And then, of course, as I'm planting, I'm explaining exactly what we're doing. I want everybody to understand all of these steps in detail, massive detail, so that when we plant this one church, we're ready to right away start looking at the next place as well. So let's go to step 7. While I'm training people, once I start training about ministries, we start practicing ministries before we ever have a church service. So all of these ministries that are going to impact our community, we start doing these ministries in the community before we ever have a worship service. I'm going to tell you something that's going to shock you, I think. But you actually can grow your church faster before you have a worship service than after. When you're doing a church plant, now this is church planting only I'm talking about here, you can grow a team really quick before you even have a worship service. And one of the ways is to do these impact ministries in the community. It makes a big deal. And so we want to make sure that all of our ministries are running well before we have our first grand opening service for the people who will be coming from the community. And there are a lot of ministries that could be. It could be the worship ministry, greeting ministry. Oh, I wish I had time to tell you about the greeting ministry we do. We actually have 3 different levels of greeters. We have outside greeters. I'm going to give you a really short version. Outside greeters that meet people when they're coming to the church and greet them outside. If it's raining or snowing, they have umbrellas there that they can help people in. They'll park cars for people who are elderly or handicapped. They'll do anything that they can to make the first experience, even outside, a great one. Second layer is more like traditional greeters where they're handing out programs, but they're looking for new people. And when they see new people, they're trained to hand them off to a 3rd level of greeters. These are people who are just there for brand new guests. And they spend the rest of the day, if with permission from the person, the rest of the day at church with that person, showing them around, sitting with them in Sabbath school or in church, and just getting to know them, introducing them with other people as well. It's a really good way of integrating new people into your church. Children's ministry, we teach them how and why we do children's ministry the way we do. Very important to learn about small groups. Small groups is a huge part of what we do as well. And then how do we do community outreach, evangelism projects as well. So I'm going to just go through these steps, and then we'll ask questions at the end because I'm running out of time. But the next one is this 5-month pre-launch process. So once I've gotten to the point where we are building this church, we're building this team really, and this team is being trained, and I feel like we're getting to the place where they're strong, they're starting to be disciples. Now, I feel like they're getting it and they're learning how to be leaders. We're becoming a spiritual community. All these things are happening. Then I look at a calendar, and 5 months in the future, I circle a Saturday that's going to be our grand opening Sabbath. And I tell people, this is when we're going to open. And we have a 5-month process then between now and then that helps our church explode. And I like to have large churches. I want to have churches that grow big because I want to multiply. I want to see churches that go from being kind of limping around, and a lot of church plants start really small, and it takes a long time to build. I understand that. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with small churches. But I like to do, my personal style is start a little bit bigger so that we can multiply quickly. And I want that exact thing happening. So what that looks like, let me share my screen again, is we do a weekly process that looks like this over those 5 months. Every week we do something new during those 5 months. So the first month we do an information meeting. It's kind of a public meeting to tell everybody what we're doing. The next week we have a social, and it's just a social. We just getting to know people, building relationships. And this is a great time to invite people who are farther from Christ, who are not interested in church yet, so that we can start building relationships with them. And then the next week we have a practice service. And this is a service where we're actually starting to practice what our worship service is going to look like. And we practice and practice and practice because we want to do things well from the beginning. You know, I mentioned I ran restaurants. Can you imagine if I ran a restaurant and like the week that we're going to open, then I start saying, well, maybe we need to start training somebody. Maybe the day before we open, maybe we need to train you to be a waiter. Maybe you need to train to run the till. If people are not ready from the first start of a business, you would say, wow, what's wrong with this? Why weren't they ready? But we have a lot of churches, they're not ready. I mean, I remember going to a church plant. It wasn't an Adventist church. It's just one that happened to open by my house one time, and I got a notice. I showed up there. There was nobody to greet me. I walked in where the time the service was supposed to start according to the postcard in the mail. They were still setting up. It was just a shambles. They were not ready. And if I was somebody who was actually looking for a church, it would not have been a good thing at all. So we want churches that are done well from the beginning because God deserves to look good. I mean, he's a perfect God. If we do a service that is done poorly and not ready, then it makes no sense. And then the next week we do a social again. So we do a lot of socials. Over the 5 months, it looks like this. So information meeting 1 week. The next week we do a social, practice service, and then social. So you see we do twice as many socials as anything else. Next week we have a meeting just explaining what we're doing. It's kind of like doing an interview, but now it's for a group. Letting people know what's going on, inviting anybody who's interested now, they can come because the core team is already set. Now we can start bringing in some more people that are going to help us in this church. They're not necessarily going to be the core leaders, but they're going to be helpers in the church. And they're going to be the ones that my core team will begin discipling. Doing another social the next month. So this goes 5 months in a row before we actually have the grand opening. So this is a very detailed process. It's time consuming, but if you do it right, it'll triple the size of your church. The first time I did this is that church I mentioned in Seattle. We had 217 people, our very first service. The first time we tried this in our conference, the church had 312 people in their very first service. The first time I tried this in my last conference, we had 200 people show up. And this really helps churches thrive. It's a way that, if you start out larger, it's easier then to take another group of people sooner and start another church in another community, and then another church in another community. So it helps the multiplication process. I really am not a big fan of big churches, to be honest. I'm not a fan of them. I prefer to do churches that are in the 120 to 150 range. And I think it has a lot more intimacy. It's easier to build disciples that way. You certainly can do it. That's just my personal preference. Others can do it in different sizes. But what I'm looking for is trying to multiply. So if I have 200 people, I can immediately start planning for the next church plant right away. Start taking some of these people that I've made disciples and either putting them in charge of this plant that we just started, and I go plant, or send them off and plant. Either way works fine. And then we get to the great grand opening. And this is done a little bit differently. This is step 9. Let me share that screen. This is done a little bit differently than most churches you've seen open. We do this very purposefully. We make sure that people know we're here to serve, and then we invite everybody who comes not to do regular ministries, but to do simple tasks in the church. At the end of the service, we let everybody get up, and we have these banners around around where we're meeting, and they have ministry names like children's ministries might be one. And they're not going to join children's ministry, but they're going to do things that can support a ministry. Like they're going to build crafts at home and then bring them to the leader so they can use them. Or the different ministries, they're going to have these supporting ministries that anybody who comes can get involved in something very easy, something simple, because we want them to feel like they're part of the family right away from day one. And if I had time, I'd go through the entire assimilation process with you. the 10th step is this: we multiply. Even our very first service, we talk about planting another church. And in fact, we take up an offering for the next church. So when I get up there that very first grand opening Sabbath day, I talk about the next community that we're going to serve, or whoever's taking up the offering. And today's offering is going to be used for whenever we do send out another group for another community in a different area. So we're always talking about this in the core team meetings. We talk about it in our communications with our church all the time. We are multipliers. We're following God's path. So again, the key is we want to obey God. We want to multiply. And that's why we do church the way that we've done it. Again, these are principles. You can do it however you want. Hit the stop share here. We just want people to have an idea of where they're going, and we can help you with this if you're planting or you're not planting. If there's some of these steps that you'd like to integrate into your church, if you'd like more information about something, all of this stuff. I told you this morning that I'm here to serve you. Whatever I need is not important. It's what you need that's important, because you're at the front lines. And so I want to be here to help resource you, to do training or answer questions or whatever you need, just to cheer you on and say, congratulations, keep going, great work. All right, sorry I had to rush to the last part, but we're almost out of time. Is there maybe time for one question?
Yes, Pastor, thanks very much for coming today and sharing with us these information. I'm just wondering, you did mention that what you're sharing is mostly applicable for planting new churches. Is there anything that is customized for churches that is already in existence to sort of optimize the evangelism arm?
Well, we actually have I have another presentation I have on evangelism, on how to build an outreach culture and a cycle of evangelism in a church. So if you want me to do that in the future, I can. We also have another program that's coming out. COVID kind of messed things up. We were planning on launching that at the end of the summer, but it probably won't launch until next year. But it's called Allies in Mission. And it's a way to make existing churches more healthy. And what that is we get together once every 10 weeks on a Sunday. It has to be the leader of the church, whoever that is, and the most of the church board, at least 5 of them. They come with several other churches. They're bringing the same thing, either their pastor or their leader, and at least 5 board members, or it could be elders too. And we train extensively on how to become a very healthy, effective church. And so that's going to be available for all churches next year as well. I launched that in New York, and we've had a great success with it. And other conferences are now wanting to bring it in as well. So we have a lot of stuff for you. I mean, yeah, I couldn't list all the stuff that this conference can do for your church. There's a lot of stuff. It's just what do you need is more important than what do we have.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. All right, so I see that we hit that magic 6 o'clock hour. I don't know who's leading this, if you wanted to say some words or.
Thank you so very much, Pastor Leddy, for your service today and making us aware of the fact that Potomac Conference has a whole lot for us. We're definitely going to look into that and see how we can benefit with all of this. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask, is Elder Mungeon on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
May I please ask you to close us out with prayer?
Sure. Absolutely. Let us pray. Our Father in heaven, once again, we truly thank you for such an awesome Sabbath. We thank you, Lord, for the spiritual food that you've fed us with. We continue to pray that you would help us and teach us how to digest that food, Father, so that the outcome may be to glorify you in all that we do, not only in our home, but in our communities as a church family. I continue to pray that you would, well, we first thank you for Pastor Leddy and just how you've blessed him with so much information and the things that he's doing, the things you've allowed him to do. And we thank you, Lord, for the fruits that has been sowed from these efforts. And I pray that you would continue to use him with the conference in a mighty way. And then just be with the members as we take in what's been shared and start tilling our own fields and producing fruit there. Continue to be with the church as we transition into this next phase of Bible study. May you continue to bless and keep us. And then we just thank you for all you've done, what you're doing now, and what you will do in the future. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.